There is a point underground where daylight has never existed. No wind, no sound from the surface. Only rock, water, and gravity pulling you deeper. In the Caucasus Mountains, beneath layers of solid limestone, lies a cave so deep that reaching the bottom takes days, not hours. To descend, you move farther from rescue, farther from communication, farther from any margin for error. This is Veryovkina Cave, one of the deepest natural voids ever entered by humans. The people who went inside were not chasing myths. They were trained explorers, scientists, engineers. They understood the risks. And still, they chose to descend. On paper, the goal was simple. Map the cave. Measure its depth. See how far the earth opens beneath our feet. But caves don't behave like mountains. When something goes wrong, you don't turn around and climb back up. You wait. In the dark. In the cold. Hoping nothing changes above you. As teams pushed deeper, they built temporary camps underground. Hundreds, then thousands of meters below the surface. Rope systems stretched for kilometers. Supplies had to be carried by hand. Every battery mattered. Every light mattered. And every decision had to last for days. Then something changed. The deeper they went, the harder it became to stay connected with the world above. Signals weakened. Communication windows shrank. At certain depths, the cave simply swallowed every attempt to reach the surface. Down there, losing contact doesn't mean inconvenience. It means no updates, no backup, no one knowing what condition you're in, or if you're still moving at all. That was the moment the expedition crossed an invisible line. What began as exploration became exposure, not to mystery, but to limits. Because at extreme depth, the cave doesn't need to collapse to trap you. It only needs you to go one step too far. Crossing that line didn't happen all at once. It happened meter by meter. To go deeper, the teams had to build a world underground. Not a metaphor, a system. Fixed ropes were installed down vertical shafts that never widened. Each rope became the only path back. If one failed, everything below it stopped existing. Temporary camps were established far beneath the surface. Places to sleep, to eat, to dry equipment. Each camp marked a decision. Once supplies were placed there, turning back became harder. Time behaved differently at depth. There was no sunrise, no sunset, only work cycles and exhaustion. Days underground blurred together. The cave itself began to change. Dry passages gave way to wet stone. Water seeped from walls that had never seen air before. Some routes ended, not in rock, but in water. Cold, silent, flooded. At the lowest levels, progress depended on precision. Every movement had to be planned. Every mistake had to be survived. There was no room for improvisation. The deeper they went, the heavier everything became. Equipment, fatigue, consequences. Carrying one extra battery meant carrying it for kilometers in total darkness. And still, they kept going, because turning back meant accepting a limit. And limits were exactly what this expedition was trying to measure. But depth doesn't negotiate. It only accumulates. Pressure, cold, distance. By the time the teams reached the deepest sections, they were no longer just exploring the cave. They were operating at the edge of human tolerance. One delay, one injury, one change in conditions, and the entire system could unravel. This was no longer about how deep the cave went. It was about how much strain the human presence could withstand. and the cave had not yet responded. The first warning was not dramatic. It was subtle. It began with communication. At shallow depths, contact with the surface was limited, but possible. Short messages, scheduled check-ins, enough to know someone was still listening. Deeper down, those windows began to close. Signals weakened. Responses took longer. Sometimes, they didn't come back at all. Rock absorbs radio waves. At extreme depth, stone doesn't reflect sound. It swallows it. To stay connected, the teams relied on specialized systems designed to transmit signals through solid ground. Even those had limits. At certain depths, communication was no longer continuous. It became conditional, dependent on position, on equipment, on power, and on whether the cave allowed the signal to pass. At the same time, the environment began sending its own warnings. Water appeared where it hadn't before. A slow drip, then a thin flow. Not dangerous yet, but enough to be noticed. In deep caves, water is never neutral. It carries information about rainfall above, about pressure changes, about what might be coming. Equipment felt heavier. Movements slowed. Simple tasks required more effort, not because something had failed, but because the margin was shrinking. None of this stopped the expedition. There was no alarm, no clear signal to retreat. Only a pattern. Small changes, stacking quietly, on top of one another. This is how deep environments warn you. Not all at once, but gradually, by reducing your options. Before you realize, you're running out of them. By the time the warning became obvious, the teams were already far below the point where turning back was easy. And the cave was still silent. The change didn't arrive suddenly. It accumulated. Communication became unreliable. Not gone, but inconsistent. Messages were delayed, then shortened, then reduced to silence for long stretches of time. At that depth, silence carries weight. It means the surface no longer knows what is happening below, and the people below no longer know how much time they have. If something goes wrong, at the same time, the cave continued to shift. Water levels rose in sections that had been passable before, not flooding, but narrowing. Roots became slower, heavier, less forgiving. Cold stopped being a background condition. It became a factor. Wet equipment never fully dried. Body heat was lost faster than it could be replaced. Fatigue stopped being temporary. It became cumulative. At extreme depth, small problems don't stay small. A delay of minutes turns into hours. A mistake in judgment spreads across the entire system. Every camp below depends on every camp above. Break one link, and nothing moves. Decision-making began to change. Not because of panic, but because of limitation. Options disappeared. Go forward too fast, and you risk exhaustion. Wait too long, and conditions may change behind you. There was no single moment that forced a retreat. No collapse. No dramatic failure. Just a growing realization. The environment was no longer passive. It was active. Not hostile, but indifferent. Unresponsive. To planning. To experience. To intent. At that point, the expedition was no longer measuring the cave. The cave was measuring them. Their endurance. Their margin. Their ability to remain in control. And control, at that depth, was becoming fragile. Control was slipping. Not as a theory, as a condition. At that depth, there was no buffer left. No extra warmth. No spare energy. No time to wait and see. The situation tightened. Communication was breaking into gaps. Water was moving where it hadn't before. Fatigue was no longer something sleep could fix. Each hour underground made the next one harder. This was the danger point. Not collapse. Not panic. Delay. Because delay at extreme depth doesn't look dramatic. It looks quiet. And then it becomes irreversible. The options were brutally simple. Go deeper. And commit to sections with fewer exits and rising water. Stay and let cold, exhaustion, and uncertainty decide the outcome for you. Or leave, knowing the way out would take days and demand everything that remained. There was no safe path. But there was one that still allowed choice. That window was closing. At extreme depth, you don't wait for certainty. You act before conditions lock you in place. The decision came fast, clear, final. They stopped pushing forward. They stopped collecting. They stopped measuring depth. The mission was rewritten. Not as an objective. As a rule. Everyone turns around. Now. Records were abandoned. Unmapped passages left behind. The deepest point reached. Ceased to matter. The instant the call was made. From that moment on, every action had one direction. Up. Not calmly. Not recklessly. With controlled urgency. This is what stopping looks like. When stopping is the only way out. Not hesitation. Not fear. A cut. Clean. Deliberate. The descent tested how far humans could go. This decision tested whether they would get out in time. Up. That single word now governed everything. The exit was not a reversal. It was an operation. Every rope had to hold. Every anchor had to perform. There would be no second attempt. The cave did not relax. Just because the direction changed. Water continued to move. Cold continued to drain heat. Fatigue followed them upward. Step by step. The climb out was longer than the descent. Not in distance, but in cost. Each camp became a checkpoint. Gear was collected. Loads were redistributed. Nothing unnecessary was taken. Everything essential was carried. Mistakes were no longer theoretical. A slip here did not mean delay. It meant loss. Movement slowed, not from hesitation, but from precision. Rushing wasted energy. Stopping wasted heat. The only option was controlled motion. Above them, the cave narrowed. Below them, depth no longer mattered. Only distance. To the surface, time stretched. Hours blurred. Sleep came in fragments. Never enough. But enough to keep going. At extreme depth, escape is not a sprint. It is endurance. Under pressure. Eventually, light returned. Not suddenly. Gradually. As a change in texture. A difference in air. When the first shaft opened toward the surface, no one spoke. There was nothing left to say. The cave released them. Without acknowledgement. No sign. No warning. Just silence. They emerged. Not as conquerors. But intact. The exit did not feel like victory. It felt like confirmation. The decision to stop had been made. In time. And that, more than depth, defined the expedition. Every extreme expedition eventually reaches the same question. Not how far it can go, but where it should stop. In the deepest cave on Earth, there was no wall that forced retreat. No final barrier. No signal that said, "You are not allowed here." The boundary was invisible. It appeared as narrowing options, as shrinking margins, as decisions that could no longer be undone. This is the part we often misunderstand. Limits are not always physical. They are operational. They exist where control begins to weaken, faster than it can be restored. In Veryovkina, humans did not turn back. Because the cave ended, they turned back. Because their ability to manage the cave was ending. And that distinction matters. Because it means the boundary was not set by geology. It was set by judgment. The same pattern appears whenever humans push downward, into caves, into oceans, into the earth itself. Depth promises answers, but it also strips away safety, communication, and time. What remains is a narrow window where decisions still matter. Cross that window, and the environment decides for you. The explorers left the cave with data, maps, and records. But the most important thing they carried out was restraint. Knowing when to stop did not diminish the expedition. It defined it, because progress is not measured only by how far we go, but by how precisely we recognize the moment we must turn back. Somewhere beneath the earth, other projects would face the same test. Not in caves, but in drills, in machines, in depths measured, not by rope, but by kilometers. And once again, humans would discover that going too far is rarely a single mistake. It is a series of decisions made just past the point where control begins to fade. That is the real boundary, and it does not announce itself.